The wind howled through the park, carrying the sharp scent of autumn leaves and the distant echo of a world at war. Sergeant Daniel Harper, his uniform crisp but his eyes heavy with ghosts, stood beneath an ancient oak, its gnarled branches clawing at the gray sky. He hadn't been home in years, and this park, once a haven of childhood laughter, now felt like a stranger's land. Daniel's boots crunched against the gravel as he adjusted the weight of his rucksack. He was 32, but the war had carved lines into his face that belonged to a much older man. He had come to this small-town park in Virginia, not for nostalgia, but for a fleeting moment of peace before his next deployment. The bench by the pond, where he used to skip stones as a boy, called to him. He sat, the cold wood biting through his fatigues, and stared at the water's glassy surface. It was then he noticed the old man. Shrunken and frail, the stranger sat on the opposite bench, his coat too large for his frame, a fedora tilted low over his brow. His hands, gnarled as the oak above, clutched a worn photograph. Daniel's soldier instincts kicked in. Observe, assess, act, but something about the man's stillness disarmed him. Their eyes met, and the old man's gaze, sharp and knowing, pinned Daniel like a butterfly to a board. "You're a soldier," the old man said, his voice gravelly but warm, cutting through the wind. It wasn't a question. Daniel nodded, unsure why he felt exposed. The old man rose, his movements slow but deliberate, and crossed the path to stand before him. Without a word, he extended the photograph. Daniel took it, his fingers brushing the man's cold, papery skin. The image was faded, its edges curling, but the face in it stopped his breath. A boy, no older than 6, grinned up at him, holding a toy soldier in one hand and a stick in the other. It was Daniel, unmistakably him. "How did you?" Daniel's voice cracked, his mind racing. He hadn't seen this photo in decades, not since his mother died and the family albums were lost in a move. The old man's lips curved into a faint smile, but he said nothing, only tipped his hat and shuffled back to his bench. Daniel's heart pounded. He wanted to chase after him, demand answers, but the weight of the photograph anchored him. Who was this man? How could he have this piece of Daniel's past? The park faded around him as memories flooded back, summers spent racing through these paths, his mother's laughter, his father's stern voice calling him home. Daniel had buried those memories when he enlisted, when the world became a blur of orders and gunfire. Now, this single image threatened to unravel the armor he'd built. He shoved the photo into his pocket, his hands trembling, and stood. The old man was gone, as if he'd dissolved into the mist. Daniel spent the rest of the day wandering the park, the photograph burning a hole in his pocket. He didn't know why it unsettled him so deeply. Maybe it was the boy's smile, so untouched by the weight of the world. Maybe it was the old man's silence, as if he knew something Daniel didn't. By dusk, he found himself back at the bench, staring at the pond again. A young woman approached, her red scarf bright against the gray evening. She was in her 20s, with a nervous energy that made Daniel tense. "You're Sergeant Harper, aren't you?" she asked, her voice soft but urgent. Daniel frowned, nodding. She hesitated, then pulled a small notebook from her bag. "My name's Clara. I think you met my grandfather today. He's been looking for you." Daniel's grip tightened on the bench. "He's been carrying that photo for years," she continued, her eyes searching his. "He said it belonged to someone who needed to remember." "Remember what?" Daniel's voice was sharper than he intended. Clara flinched but didn't back away. "I don't know," she admitted. "He's not well. He doesn't talk much anymore. But he was adamant about finding you." She handed him the notebook. Inside were names, dates, and addresses, dozens of them, spanning years. One entry, circled in red, read, "Daniel Harper, Virginia, 2025. Daniel's stomach churned. This wasn't random. The old man had tracked him. Clara's voice softened. "He used to be a photographer, you know. Traveled the world, captured moments most people forgot. He said every photo tells a story, but some stories need to be returned to their owners." Daniel's mind reeled. He wanted to dismiss it as coincidence, but the photograph in his pocket felt alive, pulsing with questions. Why him? Why now? As Clara walked away, promising to return tomorrow, Daniel sat alone, the notebook in one hand, the photo in the other. The boy in the picture stared back, innocent and unafraid. Daniel envied him. He didn't know what the old man wanted or why this moment felt like a reckoning, but he knew one thing. He couldn't run from it. Not this time. The next morning, Daniel returned to the park at dawn, the photograph and notebook tucked inside his jacket. Sleep had eluded him, his dreams a tangle of childhood laughter and the screams of war. The park was quieter now, the mist thicker, wrapping the world in a shroud that felt both protective and oppressive. He sat on the same bench, his eyes scanning for the old man or Clara, but the paths were empty. The weight of the unknown pressed against his chest, heavier than any rucksack he'd carried. He opened the notebook again, tracing the circled entry with his finger. Daniel Harper, Virginia, 2025. The other named strangers from towns he'd never visited spanned decades. Some had notes. Delivered, 2018. Found peace. Others were crossed out, with no explanation. The old man's mission, whatever it was, felt vast, almost sacred. Daniel's rational mind screamed that this was madness, that he should walk away, but the boy in the photograph tethered him to this mystery. By noon, Clara appeared, her red scarf a beacon in the fog. She wasn't alone. A boy, no older than 10, trailed behind her, kicking a pebble along the path. His eyes were wide, curious, but guarded, like he'd seen too much for his age. "This is Eli," Clara said, her voice softer than yesterday. "My little brother. He wanted to meet you." Daniel nodded, unsure how to respond. Kids made him uneasy. They saw through the walls adults built. Eli stared at Daniel's uniform, his gaze lingering on the medals pinned to his chest. "You fight in wars?" he asked, blunt as only a child could be. Daniel's throat tightened. "Yeah," he said, his voice low. "I do." Eli nodded, as if that explained everything, then pulled a crumpled drawing from his pocket. It was a soldier, stick figure simple, standing under a tree. "That's you," Eli said, pointing. "Grandpa said you're important." Daniel's pulse quickened. "Why?" he asked, looking at Clara. She shrugged, her expression torn between affection and frustration. "Eli's been talking about you since Grandpa showed him that photo. He's sensitive, picks up on things." Daniel glanced at the boy, who was now tossing pebbles into the pond, each splash rippling the water's surface. Something about Eli's quiet intensity reminded Daniel of himself at that age before the world hardened him. Clara sat beside him, her voice dropping. "Grandpa's dying," she said bluntly. "Cancer. He's got weeks, maybe days. That's why he's here, why he's so focused on you." Daniel's chest ached, not just for the old man, but for the urgency in Clara's eyes. "He won't tell me why you matter," she continued. "But he's been carrying that photo for years, like it's his last mission." She handed Daniel a folded letter, sealed with wax. "He wanted you to have this. Said you'd know what to do." The letter felt heavy, like it carried the weight of a life. Daniel didn't open it, not yet. He needed answers, not more mysteries. "Where is he?" he asked. Clara pointed to a small house across the park, its windows dark. "He's resting, but he'll be here tomorrow. He always comes back." Daniel nodded, his mind a storm of questions. Who was this man, and how did he know Daniel's past? That afternoon, Daniel walked to the house, the letter unopened in his pocket. He knocked, but no one answered. The silence felt deliberate, like the old man was testing him. Frustrated, Daniel returned to the park, sitting by the pond until dusk. Eli's drawing lay beside him, the stick-figure soldier staring up at the sky. It was then that the twist came a memory, sharp and unbidden. Daniel, at 6, running through this park, chasing a man with a camera. Not just any man. A photographer, laughing, snapping pictures of kids playing. Could it be him? The realization hit like a grenade. The old man wasn't a stranger. He was there, all those years ago, capturing a moment Daniel had forgotten. But why this photo? Why now? Daniel's hands shook as he opened the letter. Inside was a single sentence, written in a trembling hand. "Find the others, Daniel. They're waiting." No signature, no explanation. Just those words, burning into his soul. The letter's words haunted Daniel through the night. "Find the others, Daniel. They're waiting." He sat in his motel room, the photograph and notebook spread before him like pieces of a puzzle he couldn't solve. The boy in the photo smiled, oblivious to the man he'd becoming, a soldier who'd seen too much death, too much loss. Daniel's fingers traced the names in the notebook, strangers tied to him by an old man's cryptic mission. He didn't know what the others meant, but the weight of responsibility settled over him like a shroud. At dawn, he returned to the park, driven by a need he couldn't name. The old man was there, sitting on his bench, his fedora casting shadows over his sunken face. Daniel approached, his heart pounding. "Who are you?" he demanded, his voice raw. The old man's eyes, clouded but piercing, met his. "You already know," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "You just don't want to remember." Daniel's memory flashed again, the photographer in the park, his camera clicking as Daniel and other kids chased fireflies. "You were there," Daniel said, his voice trembling. "When I was a kid. You took this picture." The old man nodded, a ghost of a smile on his lips. "I took a lot of pictures, son. Moments people lose. Moments they need." He coughed, a wet, rattling sound, and Daniel saw the truth in Clara's words. The man was fading. "Why me?" Daniel asked, holding up the photograph. The old man leaned forward, his hands trembling. "Because you forgot who you were before the war. That boy," he pointed at the photo, "he's still in you. And he's got work to do." Daniel's throat tightened. He wanted to argue, to say the boy was gone, buried under years of blood and ash. But the old man's gaze held him, steady and unyielding. Before Daniel could respond, a new figure appeared, a woman, mid-40s, with a face etched by grief. She carried a photograph of her own, identical in size and age to Daniel's. "You're him, aren't you?" she said, her voice breaking. "The soldier he's been looking for." Daniel froze, his eyes darting to the old man, who only nodded. "The woman Margaret," she said, showed him her photo. A girl, laughing, holding a daisy. "That's me," she whispered. "He gave it to me last week. Said I needed to find you." The twist hit Daniel like a punch. He wasn't the only one. The notebook, the names, they were others like him, tied to the old man's photographs, each carrying a piece of their past. Margaret's story spilled out, a life unraveled by loss, a childhood forgotten until the old man found her. "He said we're connected," she told Daniel. "That you'd know what to do." Daniel's head spun. He didn't know what to do. He was a soldier, not a savior. The old man spoke again, his voice weaker. "The photos aren't just memories. They're promises. Promises you made to yourself long ago." He handed Daniel another photograph, this one showing a group of children, Daniel among them, playing in the park. "Find them," he said. "Bring them back." Daniel's hands shook as he took the photo. The weight of it, of all of it, threatened to crush him. As the old man stood to leave, Margaret grabbed Daniel's arm. "Don't let him go," she whispered. "He's the only one who knows why." But the old man was already walking away, his figure dissolving into the mist. Daniel wanted to chase him, but Margaret's grip held him back. "We'll find them together," she said, her voice fierce with hope. Daniel nodded, though doubt gnawed at him. He wasn't sure he could save anyone, not even himself. Daniel and Margaret sat in a diner across from the park, the photographs and notebooks spread between them like a map to a forgotten world. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows on their faces. Daniel's coffee had gone cold, but he didn't notice. His mind was on the group photo, the faces of children he barely remembered but felt tied to, as if their laughter still echoed in his bones. Margaret's photo lay beside it, her younger self frozen in a moment of joy. "What do we do now?" she asked, her voice steady but searching. Daniel didn't have an answer. The old man's words, "Find them, bring them back," rang in his head, but they felt like a riddle with no solution. He traced the names in the notebook again, each one a stranger, yet each one a piece of this strange, shared destiny. "We start with these," he said finally, tapping the notebook. "We find them. We give them their photos." It sounded simple, but the weight of it felt like carrying a wounded comrade through a battlefield. They spent the day tracking leads, starting with the addresses in the notebook. Most were outdated, houses sold or abandoned, but one named Thomas Reed led them to a nearby nursing home. Thomas was 80 now, his hands trembling as he took the photograph Daniel handed him. It showed a boy, maybe 7, building a sandcastle. "That's me," Thomas whispered, tears welling in his eyes. "I haven't seen this in 70 years." He looked at Daniel, his gaze sharp despite his age. "The old man, he's still doing this." "You know him?" Daniel asked, his heart racing. Thomas nodded. "Met him in 68. He gave me a different photo then, told me to hold on to who I was. I didn't listen." His voice broke. "Lost my way after Vietnam. But you're doing what I couldn't." Thomas's words hit Daniel hard. He wasn't just carrying photographs. He was carrying lives, stories, regrets. The twist came that evening, back at the park. Clara was there, alone, her face pale. "Grandpa's gone," she said, her voice hollow. "He passed this morning." Daniel's chest tightened, the air suddenly too thin. The old man was gone, and with him, the answers Daniel needed. Clara handed him a box, small and weathered. "He left this for you," she said. Inside were more photographs, dozens of them, each with a name and address written on the back. A note, in the same trembling hand, read, "You're their keeper now, Daniel. Don't let them forget." The weight of the box felt like the weight of the world. Daniel looked at Margaret, then at Clara, and saw the same resolve in their eyes. They were in this together, bound by the old man's mission, by the promises in these photographs. Each image was a life, a story, a piece of someone's soul. Daniel didn't know if he was strong enough to carry them all, but he knew he had to try. As night fell, Daniel stood by the pond, the photographs in his hands. The boy in his own photo smiled up at him, and for the first time in years, Daniel felt a flicker of that boy's hope. He wasn't just a soldier anymore. He was a keeper of memories, a bridge between past and present. The park stretched out before him, silent but alive with possibility. He'd find the others. He'd bring them back.